Henning Pauli again with another ATEM setup. Thank you, Sweetwater, for sending the new ATEM Mini or ATEM SDI Pro ISO with 4, you'll see this. But we're doing an SDI setup now with 2 Blackmagic Design cameras being remote controlled through the software. And we put, did I put another camera? Oh, I put this camera on there, which had the wrong white balance and was way too dark. Again, do not judge the actual video quality we're getting because I'm focusing on how to set up and how it's all wired up and the little elements and pieces and little gadgets that you need to make it work. The cameras weren't even pointing at relevant things. That's not the issue. Again, this camera right there that I used, it's an FX6 with an SDI out. It made sense SDI-wise. It looked way too dark and way too yellow. So don't focus on that. I hope this is getting you an idea of what you can do with an SDI workflow. Maybe that's for you. Most people don't use SDI. I love it, and maybe you will too after seeing this video. Okay, here's a more complex setup that you can do with a 4-camera input with the ATEM SDI Pro ISO. That's complicated. So 4 inputs, ISO recording, and SDI. That's the one that Sweetwater sent. It's my first foray into the SDI version, so I can tell you a couple of things about it. What I want you to see is the chaos that can ensue if you're really running this with software control and a couple of inputs. And I'm going to run you through what you need to make this setup happen. However, do not be afraid. This is with all 4 inputs and SDI and monitors and all that stuff. Later on in your journey through the Blackmagic world, you might get to something like this or even way more complicated setups. But when you start with just an ATEM, put your computer into it and 1 camera and even maybe HDMI, it is not quite that complicated. So on input number 1, we have this Studio Pro G2 with SDI output going into 1, which means the camera is set to number 1, ignore that it says 4, and then they actually communicate correctly. And I have to run an SDI signal back into it, a program output signal. Program means whatever you have on right now, so that's this up here, the program. That signal needs to be sent back into the camera so that I can remote control it with the software. And one way to do it would be just to take the SDI out 2, right, this into the camera, and you're good. And that's likely what you might be doing if you're running 1 camera. But if you're running more than 1 Blackmagic camera and you want to control more than 1, you have to multiply your program signal. You have to create several out of 1. And what that does is this distribution. I have the 4K version. It would be enough if you're running the ATEM SDI Pro ISO or any of the HD versions to buy the HD version of this, which is cheaper. I would recommend buy the 4K version, spend the extra couple $100. I know it hurts, but later you will be future-proof and you already have the 4K ability. If you later switch to 4K and you don't have the 4K distribution, you're shit out of luck. So what this does, it is taking my 1 cable, my 1 program out, and actually splitting it up in up to 8 same signals. So one of them right here, this blue one, is going to that camera. This right here is going to the little one. It's all the same signal, it's all program out. And then this green cable here is going into my Atomos. And now here on the Atomos, you can actually see the program out. So whatever, there's Leslie, hello. So whatever I'm switching there, you can see. And I always recommend having a monitor, in this case HD is enough, and they're not very expensive, just some computer screen or a TV. 1 for program so that you can really focus, and 1 for multi-view. Because focusing and seeing details on a multi-view this small isn't great. I recommend having a dedicated program monitor. Now, of course, with these panels, except for the Mini, the standard Mini, or actually in this case the standard Mini SDI, I can pick what I see. So that will be camera 1, 2, 4, multi-view, or program. So I can actually pick what I see on the monitor. So if you wanted to only work with 1 and then, focus you could have this, but I like seeing multi-view the whole time, so that's why I've got two monitors. In this case, this setup is actually a little bit less cable intensive and converter intensive because both my monitors are Atomos and they have SDI inputs. So I don't have to convert to HDMI. If you're running a TV or computer monitor, you would need more of these SDI to HDMI or HDMI to SDI converters, which is why I recommend getting the bidirectional. That can serve you in either direction. I have spent thousands on HDMI to SDI in this size or SDI to HDMI, and they're everywhere in this house. Having one that can do both directions at the same time is a good idea. And again, you can spend $70 on the HD version or $170 on the 4K version called 12G. I would always buy the 4K version. Later on, you're going to thank me. So if you were running normal TVs, you would need more of these to go to those two screens. I don't need that because the screens have SDI input. It's very likely that you don't have something that does SDI input unless you're running a video assist from Blackmagic Design or an Atomos monitor. So this is how I'm splitting it up to go into two cameras. On camera 2, it's this puppy. That's my Sony FX6, which happens to have an SDI output. Now, cameras with an SDI output are rare, and they're usually in the higher price range, probably starting at $2,500 to $3,000. Then you would have a 3G SDI output, meaning HD, which is fine. This actually even has a 4K SDI output. But again, this is probably not the kind of gear that you would be using with this. But I have 3 cameras, all with SDI. On input number 3, right now you don't see anything, I simply have this inexpensive USB-C to different things adapter, but it has an HDMI output, an HDI cable, and I'm plugging that into my iPad. And because this does format conversion, it doesn't really care what the iPad gives it as long as it's not 4K. Okay, as long as the iPad gives out some kind of less than 4K signal, it is fine. I can do picture-in-picture stuff and so on. And you can, do games or whatever. You cannot do any Netflixy stuff because that is copyright protected. That is going with an HDMI cable into my bidirectional converter and is now running SDI into the ATEM Mini Pro SDI, ATEM Mini SDI, and ATEM SDI Pro, ATEM SDI Pro ISO, that's what it's called. And at the same time, if I needed to, I could still run one of the outputs into the SDI to HDMI output for a screen. So this actually serves 2 purposes. And again, I recommend go future-proof and buy the 4K version. You're going to thank me later because if you have cameras that can do 4K, you've got converters that can do 4K, you've got distributors that can do 4K. All you need to switch out later on is the actual switcher. And then, Bob's your uncle, your whole system switches to 4K. Wouldn't that be cool? I did some tests recording ISO files. I will show you that later. I hooked it up to the software. And that is what this adapter is for. So I've got a network connection. Because if you want to record on an external hard drive on the ATEM, you're blocking the USB port in the back. Now I can record to the hard drive, but the USB port is blocked, and that means you don't have software control through USB. So you're gonna have to use the network. Unless you're using the extreme version, which is not a bad idea, not necessarily for the 8 inputs, but it has 2 outputs even on HDMI and video outputs, and it has 2 USB ports. So you could run 2 different hard drives, or you could actually run a hard drive and USB control through software. So I'm using network cable, and that's why I need this network adapter. And there's my software. Instead of switching on the actual switcher, you could actually have this somewhere in the back if you wanted to. You could use the software. You can see here, Studio, FX6, iPad, Micro, I named these. But obviously having hands-on control is a better idea. But this is also where you set up your recording codecs, where you do different sized cutouts and all this stuff. So having access to the software is always a good idea. I don't know if I would want to run it purely on the hardware, depending on what you're doing. You could also have a Stream Deck like this connected to your computer, and that could actually, with the companion software, not this, that's not the software, but with the companion software, you could actually have this customized on your Stream Deck. That is actually why the Stream Deck is here, so that when Leslie is up there in the control room, I can also control the cameras from the Stream Deck. It's very convenient. The computer would network to this thing. Hard drive connected. Power connected. That's actually adapter number one. If you're setting something up like this, you might want to make sure that you build your whole desk around this setup, because you need an adapter. I have another adapter for power for the laptop, so you need to plug in your computer. You need a USB-C connection and some kind of USB-C power for this bidirectional converter, and you're probably going to run several of these. So you might want to have a multi-output USB power thing like I have right here to run all your converters off of. This is for the distributor. This is for one of the cameras. That's the laptop. Over here, we have the Atomos. This is for the ATEM. You see, you're going to end up with quite a few wall warts. Everything needs power. And as Leslie said when she walked in here, what kind of a mess is this? I deliberately left it just the way that it turned out to be, because you don't want this. You want to make sure that you build your desk setup around this thing as a hub. And what I would suggest is, depending on the desk you have, customizing it with these types of little outlets. And you put this right behind it, and you're actually good to go. And all the cables would go in there, and then preferably underneath the desk, you have some kind of drawer. You can build that out of wood or some box where actually everything falls in. All the cables go into the desk, and that is where this is, and this, and most of the things that you have to have. Something like this, maybe that can show you, see, where things just disappear in the table. And once you have this right behind your ATEM, you wouldn't have all this chaos on the table. I've got something else here. There's one of the older Ultra HD studio cameras, and then everything goes straight into the table right there. And in my studio, I have this in many places. I have little holes like this where you can just have cables disappear. It's relatively easy to install right there. You can see that. And you put this behind your ATEM, and Bob's your uncle, unless your uncle's name is Fred. But you will need quite a few power outlets, so make sure you've got this. Even if you're running just one camera and running an iPad or computer or Xbox or something into it, you will need converters. So it's not just the camera and the ATEM, it's at least the camera, the ATEM, and a converter, unless, of course, you're running the HDMI version. That will make things easier, but down the line, depending on what you're doing, if you're spacing cameras further away, HDMI is going to be a limiting factor in terms of cable length. And also, HDMI cables can be a lot more sturdy. If you want an HDMI cable that actually can run good quality, this is a thicker, sturdy cable that doesn't bend around corners easily, whereas this tiny little SDI cable is very unintrusive and can actually run 4K beautifully, even in higher length. So you have to decide where your journey as a content creator will go. And I would recommend buying future-proof. If you think that you're going to have cameras spaced further apart than, let's say, 15, 20 feet, up to maximum 8 meters, maybe 5 to 7, I would even say, then I would, from the beginning, go to SDI. Going to SDI, in terms of cables, converters, and everything, will also make you future-proof in terms of 4K, because the 4K switches from Blackmagic Design are all SDI. And in here, for example, in this studio, we have 2 locations where I can simply just plug in a camera, if you can see over here. I've got these SDI patch bays. Right now, only 4 things are in use. But I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 3 inputs to the switcher, 1 coming out. So if I plug in a monitor right here, I can actually see program out. I could just plug in right there. I want to have another camera, bam, plug it in there. And if I'm working on that side of the studio, there is another one up there, and I can easily plug into the R1, 2, 3, 4, and actually just plug in a camera over here without starting to pull cables through the room. So think where your journey might take you. Of course, you don't know this yet. If you want to go future-proof, make sure that everything you buy is 4K compatible, except maybe for the ATEM now, at this point in time. And even though it's gonna cost you more money, SDI will make you more flexible in the future when it comes to cable length, stability of connection, and cable thickness. Hello, I'm currently recording, and I set up this test setup with the ATEM SDI Pro ISO. Right now I'm looking into a Sony FX6 connected with SDI, but not remote controllable because it is a Sony. This right here would be the Studio Plus camera in the G2 version, and right now that is way in the back in terms of focus, and I should be able to actually change the focus through the software, as you can see right here, and colors and all that, which is, of course, if you have someone sitting there doing this remotely for you, that is very convenient. Here is a micro camera, very tiny, on the table, actually right next to this studio, just in different lens. That's a 20mm, and I can do the same. I could change my iris right here, my black levels, or pedestal as they say, my gain, which others would call ISO, my shutter speed. This can all be remote controlled, so you don't have to dig through menus. And even, let's see, the white balance, as you can see, it's getting a lot more yellow. Technically, we should be hearing this, but we are not, because I didn't turn on the input from camera 2. Now I am. Now, technically, we shouldn't have been able, or well, you weren't able to hear that on the program feed in the beginning. Why could you hear it? Well, because I instructed the ATEM to record everything isolated. So it technically should have what you hopefully heard in the beginning as an ISO track. So even though there was a mess up on my end, you could always fix it if you're recording in ISO, which is why the extra money for the ISO models is probably a good idea. So after some wiggling, I got the iPad to show up again, and that shows up like so. And if I wanted to, I can put something in the corner there, which right now is the wrong camera. But now it's the right camera, which you have to set up in the software. And that, of course, can be repositioned. And I set it up so that when I'm switching cameras, it'll still be in there. And you can change that to not be in there, but that is a preset in the software. It's not like on the big switches where that can be easily remote controlled. I can go into the other corners. However, you can see the size goes back to a preset size. Still not sure how to change that. No idea. So you can turn that off, you can turn that on, but it stays in there when it is on. I honestly can't tell you, as soon as you click the buttons to go into the four corners, it goes back to a preset size. I'm gonna have to call them about that to find out what the deal is. Now I'm gonna look at my data. And there we go, more ideas for your personal setup. Thanks for watching. I put all the links below. Thank you, Sweetwater, for getting me started on this crazy video series. You wanted one video, and now we are, I don't know where we are. And you know what? There are 3 more videos coming because I'm running you through my Studio A, guess what? Studio B and Studio C grid. Studio C grid, whatever. I will show you my full setups in each room and how the rooms work, cabling, lighting, cameras, how it's controlled, just to get you an idea of where your journey with Blackmagic Design can go if you're crazy enough to go there. So, watch those. Links are below. Thank you, Sweetwater, again. And animals at the end.
Or do you feel life passing you by? Or do you feel life pass you by? If you were given just one chance, would you be standing where you are? If you were paving streets with the same old feet that you look upon, if you were given just one chance, the man at the bar, anchored on a drink and smelling cigar,